everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ace on Music. I'm joined, as always, by my faithful producer, Mark, and my friend and assistant, Sean. So, before we get into today's topic, I really just want to recognize we lost one of the giants in the music industry just a couple of days ago. Eddie Van Halen passed away from, as far as I know, an undisclosed case of lung cancer. We all knew that he had been sick with various cancers, mouth and throat and things, but never really heard anything about the lung cancer. So it came as a bit of a shock. But I mean, he's one of those players that you can literally say there was music before Eddie Van Halen and music after Eddie Van Halen. I mean, he changed everything. He's up there with Hendrix and Santana and people like that. So, but
So sad. Very sad.
do you see him live very often?
I'm come from a younger generation, so I got to see him in 1984. Was my first time. That was at the Forum.
Nice.
A couple of friends of mine. I was very young, and I got to see him at the Monsters of Rock with Metallica, Scorpions, Kingdom Come, and Dokken, I believe.
All right.
Yeah, and that was amazing.
I never got to see them when David Lee Roth was still fronting them. I only started seeing them when Sammy was there. But I remember one time specifically, in the course of the same week, I got to see Eric Clapton, and then a few days, or it was actually, I saw Van Halen first, and a few days later I saw Eric Clapton. And here's two masters of the instrument, and they really had such opposing styles. Like when I would watch Eddie, he would bend that instrument to his will, and he would force it to make those incredible sounds. Whereas when Clapton played, it was like he was just lightly touching onto the fretboard and these wonderful.
Right.
How about you, Mark? Were you a big Van Halen fan?
I was a Van Halen fan for sure. In particular, I lived and died with Ice Cream Man.
Ah, great song.
And I still to this day think it's one of the coolest guitar riffs, guitar songs in the history of music. And that was it.
Well, I think Eddie's also responsible for one of those songs that most guitar shops ban, along with Stairway to Heaven, is they don't want to hear Eruption played in their stores.
Can you remember the first time you heard Van Halen? I'm sure we all can remember that day that we've heard Van Halen for the first time.
I do.
For me, I was a kid, and there was this guy, his name was Frogman. He lived on the corner of the street, and he had hair past his ass here, and he was cranking Eruption, just banging his head out of his car. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I go, I gotta find out what's going on with that band he's listening to, because Eruption was like, holy shit.
No problem. No, I totally get it. The first time for me was I was very young. I don't remember the exact age, but we were living in a housing area, like with a trailer park or whatever. And there was a young fellow who lived next door to us, and this was the age of pinstriping. You remember pinstriping when it was so big on cars? And he was out there pinstriping his car with some design, and had, I remember the first song that hit me was Unchained, was playing out there, and I just went, what is that? Immediately ran out, bought my first Van Halen record, and the rest is history. But
have you ever met Eddie before, any of the Van Halen?
I have. I've met Eddie Van Halen on a number of occasions, usually through my journalistic endeavors. I remember when I got to go to the press, one of my weirdest stories was, do you remember that one album they did with Gary Cherone?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I was at the Foundations Forum, and if you don't know what that is, Foundations Forum was this great convention that was held every year here in Los Angeles for more or less for hard rock and heavy metal fans. And this particular year, every year they picked a band that they were going to honor in some regard. Rush was done one year, Aerosmith, and anyway, this year they were going to do Van Halen. And at the press conference about the award, this was right when Gary had joined the band, and I went into this little room where it was kind of a similar setup like this, a 4x8 table with the chairs. and maybe 20 or 30 seats for journalists. And I went in and sat down in the front row beside the guy from MTV, and Eddie, Alex, and Gary came out, and they did their little talk and answered their questions and everything. And I was watching the MTV guy beside me, and after he asks his questions and stuff, he reaches into his bag, pulls out a Van Halen LP, clips a Sharpie to the top of it, and just drops it on the table in front of Eddie while he's answering somebody else's question. And without even missing a beat, Eddie picked up his pen, signed it, passed it to Michael, who signed it, who passed it, or passed it to Alex, who passed it, and then he handed it back, and I went, I got to do that. So, can I borrow your pen? I said, and he said, and I dropped my copy of Van Halen 1, and they all signed it, and I was like, hell yeah. But just as a last comment here, I'm going to ask both of you the immortal question about Van Halen. Sammy or Dave?
Oh, of course, Dave for me. I mean, honestly, I like Sammy. You know, he was a good person to carry the torch for Van Halen, but everything prior to Sammy was all I listened to. It was really, I wasn't really too much. Like 5150 was okay, you know. I mean, there were some songs, but to me, it's definitely.
How about you, Mark? Dave. Well, we're all on the same table. I mean, I've met both gentlemen on a few occasions, and I like Sammy as a person. He's a great guy. And I think the best example of the difference between the two camps. Do you remember that tour they did in the early 2000s where it was David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar touring together?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Well, 2001, something like that. It was odd, and it was even odder if you went backstage. And I did go backstage. It was at the Universal Amphitheater, rest in peace. And there's, for those of you who've never been to Universal Amphitheater, there's an area back. There's a stage over here. There's a kind of a backstage area, and then there's the dressing room. So to get to the stage, you have to go through the VIP area to walk through to the stage. Anyway, I went back into the dressing room area, and it was kind of like there's a long hall and there's dressing rooms on either side. It was like this side was David Lee Roth, this side was Sammy Hagar. This side had like Hooter girls hanging out hot wings, and everybody's drinking and partying, and then David Lee Roth's side, the most dour, you know, looked like somebody had just been put to death, you know. But no.
I actually have a really cool story about Eddie. Do you remember, Mark, or you weren't living here, but do you remember our Northridge earthquake was probably the biggest?
Oh, everybody knows about the Northridge earthquake.
Yeah, do you remember that, Mark? Were you living here during that time? No. Well, at the time, I was in my 20s. I was working for a moving company, and we were told that to take whatever job we wanted. A lot of these places were red tagged, so it was on our discretion if we wanted to work or go into these places. So we get to a building, and it was literally red tagged, meaning you can't enter it. And this lady was crying, please, I just want my photos, you know, and I'm working with my buddy. And as this lady's crying, this guy goes by, and my friend stops, and as she's crying to him, because he's in charge of taking. And he's all, man, I know you. And it was Eddie Van Halen, right? Mm-hmm. And Eddie's like, you don't know me. The whole time we're moving, he's like, okay, we'll take the job. We weren't going to take the job, right? And all of a sudden now he wants to risk his life because
Eddie Van Halen's there.
So we're moving this furniture, and the whole time I'm bragging. I'm like, I know you. And he's like, dude, be quiet. And anyway, make a long story short, the whole time I'm making fun of him, right? And Eddie had, I guess he was moving his nephew, from what I understand. So I don't know if it was Alex's son, but he was helping out, and he was down at the base of the stairs, and he had 3 white vans that said VH1 and VH3.
Really?
Yeah, and then I go, dude, you better go apologize to him because you look like an ass. And he's like, oh, man, you think so? And I go, I think so. And then he went down there, and I went to go raid the booze cabinet because they told us that we could take whatever. So I'm taking bottles of booze. And he's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and they just both had their kids that year. So they were having a big conversation about Wolfgang and his kid. They were smoking cigarettes and talking, and it was pretty cool. It was something I would never forget, you know.
Well,
That story was bare mentioned.
I guess, rest in peace, Eddie. Thank you for the music. It meant a lot to us. All right, moving on to our major topic for this week. Being a band manager, I get questioned a lot about the whole logistics of what a band manager is, what does a record label do, what does an agent do, all of these people involved. And I realize it can be a little bit disconcerting and a little bit confusing for people who aren't really into it. But the bigger question that comes following that question is, in today's day and age, do you still need things like managers, record labels, agents, etc., considering how the internet has blossomed with technology and things like whether it be Pro Tools to Spotify to TuneCore to Amazon.com, you name it. There are so many tools available to musicians today. SoundCloud. I mean, there are some musicians who have made their way without the benefit of a label and things like that. Like, there's been a few, like I think the Canadian guy, The Weeknd, did it entirely off of SoundCloud, just releasing his stuff there. But I guess the first question is, like, what exactly does a band manager do? Now, the way I always describe this is, if you think of a band as a corporation and the band members themselves are like the board of directors, they hire me to be the CEO to run the day-to-day operations. Every aspect of the company that is that band is under our direction. We do it, of course, in conjunction with the band members. All the big decisions are run by them, but we handle the minutiae. Sean and I have been at this. My business partner and I have been doing this for about 17 years, and so you build up styles and systems and how you go about doing this. But with the technology, it really is becoming a different game. Now, Mark, you come from the more legal side of things in the music business, and you've had your fair share of interactions with managers. How do you feel about that in today's day and age?
Well, my feeling is that we're all supposed to be good at something, and that there are some people who are good at more than one thing. But as we divide our attention, we divide our power, and that assumes you're good at everything. But if you're not good at everything, and many of the artists that I've worked with are not good at everything, they don't want to be good at numbers, they don't want to be good at, then to try to task them with the idea of running a band like a business is a really not only an unpalatable thing, but it's an impossible thing.
You nailed it right there. That's what a band is. It's a business, and you can't forget that. And sometimes in business, you got to be an a-hole. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way it is.
Well, and it's not just about the idea of being a jackass. It's about the concept that you have to negotiate. You have to be working with the booking agents. You have to. It's not that you need to bribe them, but you certainly need to have a collaboration. It's not. You don't just have 12,000 people appear. It's a lot of work that goes into this. And if you're going to focus on rehearsing and writing and a great performance, and then just like if you're going to focus on a light show, you might need a light tech. At some point you simply can't divide your efforts enough. I know some bands that have been amazing at this by themselves, but they still put a team together.
They always have to have a team, and that team has to be run by somebody, whether it's somebody hired by the band in a managerial position, or if it's somebody like me who's an outside source. It has to be somebody running the show. But the whole you nailed on another important point in that conversation there, Mark, and that is that being a successful manager is more about the relationships that you have with the agents, with the labels, with the other bands, with the promoters, and this is all key to why a band would consider having a manager. It's to tap into those relationships and those opportunities. That's what's most important. But in order to, for lack of a better term, justify having a manager, you have to have done the work first. A band, that's what a lot of these bands don't get today. You know, we talk about labels and getting signed, and they think that if somebody like me comes on board, then suddenly it's the easy street to fame and fortune. But Sean, something that you do for me when we're working is that I get so many bands sending me their demos, they're looking for management help because they like the bands, that when they see the success what we're doing. And the bottom line that I have is that if I haven't heard of your band before you contact me, probably I'm not too interested in managing you, because it means you haven't done the legwork, you haven't put the time in, you haven't shown that you can run an effective business. And that's what this is about. If you can show that you can run a business and know what's needed to be done, then then you're ready. But Sean, what all of those things I get, I send to him.
This is a tough subject, but like a lot of people have a lot of passion in their music, and they really believe on what they're giving. But bottom line is, we're not producers. We don't mix music and decide. If it's not something this is catchy, it's gonna go to the side, And with today's technology, it's so easy to put stuff together. It's overwhelming, actually. That's why managers are important. Like a musician should be focusing on music and not all the stuff of putting stuff together, But like you said, you want to have some kind of structure to the music and make sure it's organized enough to where it gets its attention. And then a lot of people fail to do that for some reason. I don't know.
What about you, Mark?
I have some strong feelings on this. We used to get, probably 30 demos a day at the firm. And I know you can't tell from looking around this place, but that's where a former life of mine was. The idea that somebody comes to you and says, I've got the chops, and maybe they do. Let's say they have the greatest songs in the history of the world, and they come to you and they say, I need representation. And you say, okay. And you listen to it and you say, yeah, this is the greatest stuff in the history of the world. But you can't represent them if they can't fill a venue. You can't represent them if they can't do anything, because the work doesn't stop when they hire you. And if they don't have the chutzpah and the drive to fill a venue, then before they get to you, what's to say that all of a sudden magically they're going to change their whole work ethic? Yeah. You need to fill that room. You need to prove it, because I've got 1,000 other people that are great, and they're working their butts off and they're filling rooms. Well, you need a deciding factor somehow to say who has a greater likelihood of success.
You're exactly right, and you just triggered something else in my thought process, and that is that the world is filled with talented musicians, people who really can play those instruments, who put the time in. But let me tell you something. There is a vast difference between somebody who is a virtuoso guitar player and somebody who is a singer-songwriter, because just because you can play the guitar doesn't mean you can write songs. That's the bottom line. And for me, from the manager side of things, it is as much work for me to manage, a band that's just starting out as it is to manage an arena band. It's just the numbers are bigger over here. And I only have so many hours in the day. He only has so many hours. So does he. We got to capitalize on those hours. So when we look at your band as potential managers, we have to believe that you are on board with what we are trying to do for you, and that you have the talent and the capability to make it come through.
I want to add something to that. We're fans.
Absolutely.
That it sounds almost like we don't want to do business with people who don't make money. But we actually want to be a part of great success because we're actually a fan. And in this studio, we're fans. We don't work with people who we don't like. I mean, sometimes we do, but most of the time we work with people who we love and we adore them, and we are a part of their success. And it's not just a part of liking you and watching you not succeed. And we like the proven track record because we know that when we like you and we fall in love with everything that you are, you're going to reciprocate. You're going to give us all the benefits of all the hard work we're about to put in and dedicate for you.
You nailed it. And, you know, the one thing that you always have to remember is that to be an effective band manager, not only do you have to have the skills to do all the stuff that a manager does, but if I don't like your music, like Mark just said, I can't really represent you because I've got to go out there in this world and believe in the product that I'm pushing onto promoters or that I'm pushing onto labels. And if I don't, then I'm not the right guy for you. I mean, we've both seen that happen many times where I've seen other bands that came to me or came to us and we went and saw them and they end up getting signed by somebody else or whatever. And because we passed and they've gone on to success and everything, but I don't believe they would have got that success if it was me or our organization doing it because we just didn't really see the vision of their music. It didn't appeal to me. So I mean, so the biggest thing that that new bands have got to do is prepare for that kind of mentality. So how do you get that sort of success? Well, it comes back to one word, and that's relationships. Now, even when you're a baby band and you're starting off and you're playing in the local bars and clubs, it's on you to make those relationships. Promoters with other bands, because you know, if the local promoters like you, like your attitude, like your band, like what you're doing, they're going to call you up, especially when the nationals come through town and they need an opening act or whatever, and you start getting some exposure. But anytime that you do that, you got to interact with the other bands. You got to build those relationships because if, you know, like we have a mutual friend who has a band and I keep telling him that, you know, he's based in LA, but he has friends in bands that play in, you know, Arizona and various other regions around here. And I keep telling him, build relationships with them. If they're in Scottsdale, say that you'll come out there and you'll do some shows with them, and then when they're ready, they'll come down to LA and you'll use your relationships to get them some shows down here. That's how you build into a national touring act.
That's what we call
Paying your dues.
A lot of the successful rock bands have paid a lot of dues.
Yeah, there is no overnight sensations.
Like Metallica, you want to talk about paying dues? They paid their dues to get where they're at.
Hell yeah.
AC/DC, all those guys.
And you know, I would like to add one more thing, which
Please.
is that there is a difference between people who are able to succeed and people that do. And the number one reason to me, because I've seen average acts succeed, and it's because there is a difference between the people who demand success and the people who don't. And I still remember the Harry Chapin stories. Harry Chapin was a folkie from a long time ago, wrote Cats in the Cradle, wrote some of the greatest songs ever that many people have never heard of. But he would go outside before a show and he would beg people to go in. He would buy them their tickets. He would do whatever it took to fill that room with people because he knew other people were watching and the other booking agents were watching, and he demanded the success, not just his work ethic, which was incredible, but he wouldn't take no. And people like that are so fun to be around because they, you know, you just ride the wave. I mean, it's incredible.
It's a balance, right? Like, there's people that are very good, and they're very good bands and music, and they don't put the record, they don't do those relationship things, and they don't, go.
It fizzles.
There's people that just put tons of work on it, but they're tone deaf. The music stuff.
Yeah, and then you get those ones in between who have both the talent and the work ethic, and those are the ones that make it. So, I mean, you can't. If you're going to succeed as a band, it's like anything else. You have to work at it like it's a full-time job. After the show, that means instead of going and cracking a beer or whatever, you get your butt down to the merch stand and you stand there and you shake hands and sign autographs for anybody who will listen, because that's how you build a relationship with your audience. And this is all things that young bands just seem to miss out on. But moving on to the idea of the labels these days, labels are a very complicated little topic all on their own, and there's some school of thought that says, really, why do you need a label in today's day and age of digital platforms and SoundCloud and Spotify and TuneCore and things like that. And the answer to that, again, is it's different for each band. For me, labels are first of all, they're a bank. Let's be blunt. Sometimes to make a record is still an expensive proposition these days. You have producers, studios' time is very expensive. It costs tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a record. And somebody's got to pay for that. Now, if you don't have a label that's fronting that money, well, then you've got to front it. So it's got to come from somewhere. Nobody works for free. So that is definitely one thing. But the labels also, it's again, relationships. They have relationships with distribution companies, with other labels in other countries, and they have relationships with PR people and shop owners and all this. So they're going, it's in their best interest, obviously, to have the record that they decide to put out of your band to sell. They want it to sell as much as they possibly can. And so that is where it is. But because labels aren't making anywhere near the money they were back in the heyday, because you don't make platinum records anymore, it just doesn't happen, well, very, very rarely, they've had to look for alternative sorts of streams of income. And also they really maximize the income they can. They really go out and push. They're very involved in the promotion of the things. But I know that one area that I get questioned about a lot, that you brought up the other day, Mark, is the infamous 360 deals. So I know you come from a lawyer background. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about 360 deals.
Well, I'm almost thrown back into the 60s with the concept of indentured servitude. The idea of saying, well, if we can't make enough money back from the record, let's see what other sources of revenue were available. And historically, what was available was, historically the streams of income that the label earned related to the album and the streams of income it would kind of give to the artist included things like the merch and the touring revenue, which wasn't always all that much to begin with. The appearance fees and all the other product lines and all these wonderful things that kind of the label said, you can take those. And the 360 came along and they said, well, we're not making enough money from the records, so let's start to take a percentage from everything that embodies who the artist is. And it's tough. I mean, I understand the concept of it. The idea that they're taking off the gross rather than the net, meaning that many cases the artist is actually losing money while making money, while the label is making money while making money, because the artist is fronting the cost of some of the expenses and the labor and the other costs involved in the sale. And it's a very fascinating thing. I mean, I could talk at length. I mean, I love the concept of licensing and other ways that artists can make money, but these label deals are onerous.
Yeah, and it all kind of started flipping on its head about 20 years ago when when digital music started really becoming a big deal, and the writing was on the wall at that point. But the entire model of the music industry did an exact flip. It used to be that bands would put out records and then they would do these massive world tours that would basically make them almost nothing as money. And they were lost leaders in order to sell more records so that you go and make these albums multi-platinum. Now, people put out a record as an excuse to go on the road, and where they really make the money from touring. Because whereas you're going to complain if a CD is more than $15 at your local shop, for some reason people don't complain when it's $1,000 for a VIP backstage ticket to go to a show. So, income has to come from somewhere.
Right, but we're talking about the value of the label deal, and there are a lot of other interesting factors here when it comes to the value of that deal. And I think it's confusing, right? Because the idea that the deal is a bad deal. All record deals are bad deals. And so you have to find value in the bad deal. And there's a lot of ways of finding value. There's obviously credibility. But one of the core areas, I think, and I remember reading about this in a book about 20-some years, maybe 30 years ago. I don't even know when. called The Future of Music, and it predicted it, and it's been dead on, which is that the labels are associated with the license ownership. And they're bundling, meaning that when the huge opportunities come along, they're only going to the artists for whom they can collect the other types of fees associated with the performance.
Well, a label's like any other business. They're in it for the profit. So, I mean, they're going to look at the biggest potential profit. But, I mean, this is obviously a conversation that we've got to expand over into another show, because we haven't even touched agents and that sort of thing. But, I mean, in today's day and age, I mean, there's another factor that is starting to play a big deal in this, which is, whether it's good or bad for labels, it's up to you, but this concept of crowdfunding. Now, I've done it with several of my bands in the past, and the wonderful part of it is that the hardcore fans of the band get something special. They usually get some special versions of the album or something like that, in exchange for paying for it ahead of time. And what that gives the band the advantage of is, at the end of the crowdfunding thing, they now have a finished record in the can that belongs to them 100%. They own the masters, and we can then take that album and license it to a label for distribution worldwide, where they don't have to play the bank, so we can fight them for better terms, better percentages, and from day one the artist is going to be making an income from it. So anyway, that's a very beginning of a long conversation that we will revisit on another show very soon. But love to hear your feedback about that. Any questions you have about this sort of thing that we didn't touch on here, acetalksmusic@gmail.com. Send it there. We'd love to open it up to all of you for this discussion. But in the meantime, I want to thank both Mark and Sean for joining me on this session and this discussion. And I want to thank all of you for your continued support and your great feedback. It's really helped us change the show into something better and better every week. And if you're interested, we also have a secondary show that's a spin-off from this one. It's called Ace on Music After Hours. It's on the patreon.com platform. You can see the link in the description below this video. Please check it out over there. You'll see what we talk about after the show, so it's kind of a lot of fun. So until next time, I want to thank you all again, and until next week, take care of yourself.